So Viren, from farm to spoon, what are the major steps in sugar business? Like, is it integrated business, be it in India, be it in other countries? But let's begin with the steps in the sugar uh, business from farm to spoon.
So the farm to spoon sugar supply chain or sugar value chain can be broken down in three major components.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the upstream
Mm-hmm.
portion, uh, which is basically where sugarcane or uh, uh, beet is grown,
Mm-hmm.
and then that comes to the mills where it is crushed and sugar is manufactured. Yeah. Now, in case of uh, sugarcane, there's an intermediate process involved
Mm-hmm.
that is first you get raw sugar,
Mm-hmm.
and then that is then further converted to refined sugar. So there are mills where who produce refined sugar or white sugar, and there are mills which produce raw sugar and store raw sugar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that essentially is the upstream portion. And then you have the midstream where from the warehouses
Mm-hmm.
where the sugar is stored,
Mm-hmm.
that's moved by bulk vessels
Mm-hmm.
to uh, refineries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are standalone refineries who basically buy raw sugar, they refine it, and produce the refined sugar, white sugar,
Mm-hmm.
and then push it forward in the value chain. So that
Mm-hmm.
is like the midstream, and then the downstream is where um, you know the refined sugar is purchased. It is again loaded in containers, trucks, rails, and it then comes to the consuming area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the end buyers. So that is the downstream portion. So these are the three main components of the entire sugar value chain.
Right. And uh, in the third part is where they, put it in consumer packs, brand it and sell it or
Yeah,
and so on.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. So,
yeah. So all those
uh,
activities happen.
right. And you mentioned white sugar. So maybe, since we discussed jaggery, let me also ask this question. There are two other types of sugar which we see in the market other than white. One is brown, right? So at what stage does it come out of the in the process that you just described? Where does the brown crystalline sugar, where does it come out?
So that's a good question, Venkat. So the the sugar is measured in Acumsa,
Hmm.
and Acumsa is nothing but it's the measure of the polarization. So it's like a crystal, right? The amount of
Yeah,
light which
light it
passes
allows you to
through
pass
the,
through.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the more the light passes, the clearer the
Yes.
crystal is, and hence so white sugar is basically which is more clear in terms
Yep.
of which has a much higher polarization. Brown sugar has less polarization because it is not really refined to the level of the white sugar,
Sorry.
and it still has some bit of impurities, but
Mm-hmm.
it is produced to be fit for human consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you remember earlier, I said that jaggery carries some vitamins, some minerals like
Mm-hmm.
phosphorus, magnesium, vitamins like B12. So those are
Mm.
still there, and that makes it more healthy.
Okay.
And that's the reason why we supermarkets still sell the brown sugar because that's considered to have more nutritional value
Mm-hmm.
compared to, let's say, a refined sugar.
Okay, so this is very interesting information for us to understand. But does it come out from the second stage that you talked about, or no? It actually still goes to the third phase companies, which actually do deal in white sugar, and they are the ones who also handle the white sugar in consumer
Yeah,
packs.
yeah.
They.
So I mean, depending on the demand, because different markets, it's all driven by the demand. So different
Mm,
markets, there are some markets which need they have a specific ask for brown sugar. So
mm,
it is during the process
mm,
they tap.
mm,
So they probably skip a few stages
mm,
of refining, but
mm,
they still sterilize enough
Hmm.
for it to be fit for human consumption.
Fit for human consumption. One more thing, which in India and many countries in Asia also, we see cube sugar very often in five-star hotels or like in upper end grocery stores. But like you, I've also spent good amount of time traveling across Africa and especially West Africa and Francophone Africa, to be more precise. Was there where I found that like the common man also consumes a lot of cube sugar, right? I mean, I think, and they will get it usually from France or other European countries. So, at what stage does sugar that you talked about get transformed into cube sugar?
So, these are all value-added specialty sugars.
Yeah,
If you look at the total volume of these kind of sugars, they're probably very less.
absolutely.
Uh, but again, sugar being a commodity, people try and keep adding value so that it is not really. It's basically a way to mitigate the price risk associated with
Yeah,
sugar.
sure.
And again, it a lot of things evolved with cultures. So wherever there was a more French influence, they had a certain way of consuming sugar. Similarly, if wherever the English went, there was a certain way of consuming sugar. So I think those traditions have followed,
Yeah, it was
and
a
then it's more of
culture shock for me to see that the man on the street in West Africa, Francophone Africa, would demand that he would only have a cube sugar because it is really more expensive, right?
yeah.
But my question was also at what stage, from an industry perspective, like processing, where do they take out and make cube sugar? At what
So
stage?
these are packers which
Hmm.
basically buy the finished product. So bulk, let's say bulk white sugar, refined sugar, and
Okay.
then they would value add, pack it in small packs or do some kind of additional processing to
Hmm.
make sugar cubes. Compress the sugar, make
Ah,
sugar cubes out of it,
so they
and so on and
compress
so
it.
forth.
They
Yeah,
basically compress it. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Compress
So
the fine
the
sugar.
basic ingredient is your refined sugar or crystal sugar, and
Hmm.
then you can produce sugar which is good for baking, castor sugar which is super
Yeah.
fine.
Yep.
There are even super refined sugar which has a
Yep.
very very low kimsa. There
Mm.
is pharmaceutical grade sugar which goes
Right.
into medicine. So all these are
Medicines.
like further down the value chain.
Process. Sure.
Yeah, depending on the need and the
Yeah.
demand.
So how integrated, the other part of my question was how integrated is this business, be it India, be it Brazil or other countries? Integrated meaning, from plantation to, refining and so on. So are the same people own it, or how is it in India? How is it in other countries?
So by and large, if you look at the global footprint of sugar,
Hmm.
uh, the plantations are very much with the farmers,
Hmm.
um, especially let's say in a country like India
Hmm.
or Thailand or some
Hmm.
of the other developing countries.
Hmm.
The farmer produce the sugarcane,
Hmm.
yeah, and then they bring the sugarcane to the mills.
Hmm.
So uh, mills definitely are not fully integrated. So a
Hmm.
lot of mills don't own the farms. They have to depend on the farmers to bring all the
Hmm.
sugarcane to them.
Hmm.
Uh, and once the sugarcane comes to the mill, they
Hmm.
process it to the point of either raw sugar or
Hmm.
refined sugar,
Hmm.
and they sell it to the market. Uh, and then they're not, I mean, I don't remember or I don't know of any mill being really integrated to the extent forward integrated that
Hmm.
they produce specialty sugar or
Hmm.
so there are a lot of co-packers which do that. Only a few mills, very
Hmm.
large groups, are forward integrated in terms of producing specialty sugar.
Right. In terms of
But the
backward integration, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
farming farming and milling operations are separate in most of the uh, sugar producing regions.
Mm. Right.
In Europe,
Hmm.
there are cooperatives,
Hmm.
and the cooperatives in some cases also have shareholding in the mills,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
producers. So
Mm.
that's where it's kind of integrated, but
Right.
still they are pretty much within the
Legally separate
ownership of.
entities, but there is a lot of
Yeah,
but yeah, yeah.
correct.
But how is it in Brazil? Because you mentioned specifically India, Thailand, and so on, and also Europe. How is it Brazil? The big is there more integration in Brazil, or it's also similar to the other countries?
It's very similar. The only difference in Brazil is that Brazil and Australia,
Mm-hmm.
they have very large scale farming. These are
Mm,
organized farming. So, for
mm,
example,
mm,
the average land holding in India, Thailand, China
mm,
is maybe 2 to 3
mm,
hectares.
mm.
Like there are 50, 60, 100 million farmers in the business, and then each one of them aggregates and sends the sugarcane to the mills. In
Right.
Brazil, Australia, the farmers are big, and that's the case in Europe as well. So they're large scale farming. So one farmer will have a huge mass of land
Mm,
where they will uh, farm the produce and sell it to the mills.
right. Right. So in India, and we see that it's sugar is a quite a political crop. There is a sugar lobby and so on and so forth. Is it similar in other countries?
Absolutely, Venkat. So sugar is an essential commodity,
Mm-hmm.
and sugar globally,
Mm,
you need farmers. It's agri product, right? So
mm,
there's a large farmer community
mm-hmm.
producing this crop. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a sensitive commodity because it's an
Mm-hmm.
essential commodity, and it
Mm,
is highly political as well. So
mm,
not only in India,
mm,
uh, across the globe, we have many countries which have government interference.
mm,
If you look at the global landscape of sugar,
mm.
so as I said, 180 million tons of production, more than 50% of the production sits in countries which are highly regulated, which means
Right.
that there is some sort of a tariff or a non-tariff barrier which the government has imposed, and
Imposed.
that
Yeah.
is mainly to protect the farmer, because
Domestic.
farmers are a large vote bank
Mm,
for governments, and hence
right.
it's a fairly protected industry.
Right. Right. So, many of the agricultural commodities get affected by insects, viruses, and so on and so forth. So are there something that such things which impact the sugarcane crop?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's at the end of the day, uh, it's agricultural crop, and it is prone to fungus and various virus.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely uh, a lot of these diseases which affect the crop and in turn affect the yields from the
Mm-hmm.
crop, and that's why tracking those diseases or treating them becomes very important. So I mean, I can name a few. I mean, there are a whole host of bacteria and viruses and fungus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think uh, the most prevalent is the sugarcane smut.
Yep.
It's a kind of a fungus, so that really affects the crop. Uh, there is the red rot disease.
Yes. Yes.
So if
You
you
can
if
you
you
can
look
see
at,
the red inside that in the
yeah,
sugar cane, right? Yeah.
sugarcane, so that's a kind of again, it's a fungal disease which plagues the sugarcane.
Mm,
Uh, there is sugarcane mosaic virus disease. Uh, so it's more of a viral thing.
mm,
And then if we look at the beet,
mm,
there is like a yellow virus disease.
mm-hmm.
So recently, if you look at the recent crop in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
1920 crop, it was
Mm-hmm.
badly affected by the yellow virus, and to the extent that 20% France
Mm.
dropped their crop by 20%,
Yes.
which is
Yes. Yes.
which had a significant bearing in the overall S&D of
Yeah.
sugar.
Supply and demand in the global market, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Similarly, there are various kinds. So I mean,
Mm. But
we
we
don't have
wanted
to
to
go
know the
into details,
top
but
ones.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But these are
a few of them
top
to
three, four ones.
understand, right? That what impacts you have in the sugar trade. So let's move on to discuss how the industry has changed since you started out in this. So what have been the major events in the history of sugar business over the last few decades, and maybe three, four, whatever is you think are important in your view?
Sure. So I think the first major change I've seen over 20 years
Mm-hmm.
is the trade flows have changed.
Okay.
So if you look at the early 90s and early 2000, Europe was the main exporter of sugar,
Okay.
refined sugar,
Mm.
to the world.
Mm.
Uh, but in 2006, the European governments decided not to give any subsidy,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and they decided to impose quotas.
Mm.
Uh, and Europe's position was then changed, uh, or the Brazil and Thailand took
Mm.
that position. So
Mm.
if you look now, the trade flows from Europe have changed to Brazil and
Mm.
Thailand. So these are the top two
Exporters.
exporters or other players in the global sugar trade.
Mm.
15 years back, Thailand was like a 50 million ton sugarcane crop.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Today, they produce close to 130, 140 million tons of sugarcane. And the Thai government has a mandate by 2023, they will increase the sugarcane production to about 200 million tons of sugarcane. So
Okay.
that's the kind of changing landscape. Brazil produces on a regular basis close to 600 million tons of sugarcane. Yeah. So that's the clear shift
Mm-hmm.
as far as the trade flow is concerned.
Mm.
Uh, Now, there has been a shift of the type of sugar.
Mm.
So, if you look at the global trade, which was anywhere between 50 to 60 million tons,
Mm.
earlier 70-80% was in the form of white sugar,
Okay.
which was ready for consumption.
Right.
And a very small portion was raw sugar, which used to come again for the refinery. Now, that
Right.
trend has totally reversed. So, of the 56 or 60 million tons, you have 80%, a majority, uh, uh, as raw sugar, and then only a small 20% is traded as white sugar. Yeah,
So is it because the importing nations want to, import raw sugar and refine it in their own place so that, like, they can give jobs to their people, or what is the driving force behind this?
yeah. So I think the driving force is number one. I think it's easier it's more efficient from a freight perspective
Mm.
to ship raw sugar as
Fair
compared
enough.
to bagged white
Yeah,
sugar. So that was
absolutely.
the main.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And earlier, when the sugar used to be shipped in break bulk vessels, there was a lot of damage and it
Oh,
used to go to multiple handling, right? So, overall, from
absolutely.
an efficiency and ingredient reputation standpoint, it was not a very efficient way of
So even industry
shipping this.
prefers it. It's not a,
Yeah,
sort of a governmental thing. It
correct. So,
is industry itself prefers this way. Okay, good. Good
prefers
to know
this way.
that.
That is one. The second biggest driver was, when Europe went out of the global trade.
Mm-hmm.
The sugar is a futures traded commodity like coffee, like
Correct.
wheat, like corn. And there
Correct.
are two futures exchange. One is the Intercontinental New York Terminal 11,
Right.
which mainly trades the raw sugar.
Mm.
And then there is the Intercontinental Exchange London Number 5 Terminal, which
Mm.
trades refined sugar.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, the difference, and both of them trade at different levels, right?
Mm.
Example, New York today is trading at $300, whereas London is trading at an average of $415.
Mm.
So this difference between the New York 11 and London 5 is what is called as the White's premium, or it's also called as the arbitrage. So it is the
Right. Yeah.
difference
I was
between
going to
these.
ask. Yeah. That. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So when before 2006, this difference used to pretty much stay within the 45 $50 mark.
Okay.
But once Europe went out,
Mm.
suddenly there was a scarcity of sugar,
Mm.
and London number 5 started coming up because demand was there but the supply was less. So this difference now, after 2006, expanded to $80, then $90, then $100, right? So what people thought, then what people thought was that it is better
To
to put a
buy.
standalone refinery at the destination rather
Right.
than ship all the white sugar from Brazil or Europe or wherever into the deficit areas. right?
Right.
So
It
the
was worth that,
refineries,
the differential justified that investment and worth it. And also, like you said, why ship less of bagged sugar when you can ship, raw?
yeah, yeah. So I mean, if the white's premium, the difference between London and New York is about $100,
Mm,
whereas the cost of refining, bringing the raw sugar, refining it, bagging it is let's say 80, $85.
mm,
So people could clearly see margin in that business, and that's how the entire trade flow has shifted from white sugar to raw
mhm,
sugar.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Um,
Interesting.
and the third shift I've seen is that earlier when white sugar used to move, it used
Mm,
to move 12,500 tons, 25,000 tons. It used
mm,
to move in small boats to medium boats,
mhm,
vessels.
mm,
Yep. Now that has been completely replaced by containers. So the global trade has moved from these small break bulk vessel boats to
mm,
containers.
mhm,
And because raw sugar trade has exploded, uh, that has now moved to all the bulk vessels. So
mhm,
your Handymax, Panamax,
mhm,
supersize and Cape size vessels.
mm,
So the demand for those vessels have come up, and that flow,
mm,
the format of flow has also really come up. So these are some of the, let's say, major shifts I've
mhm,
seen in the
mm.
last 20 years.
Right.
Uh, the one more minor shift which also has happened very recently is that Europe went out in 2006,
Mm,
where they stopped giving any export subsidies, and they put quota restrictions
mm.
because they still used to support the farmers. So
Right.
they wanted to control the quantity they produce so that
Right.
they don't have to keep
Lose money.
giving, yeah, lose money. In 2017, the European sugar industry deregulated, which means
Right.
that they removed all the quota restrictions and they allowed the most efficient producers to gain by just the economies of scale.
Right.
So
Right.
that has been the fourth, like a major shift which has happened over the last 20 years.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So, uh, are there other shifts which you want to highlight on the production side or processing side? Because quite a
So
bit of it that you talked about are like, supply chain reconfigurations kind of a thing, right? In the whole chain. But anything on the production or processing, anything changed in this industry? Maybe technology, maybe something else, or it's like it's been there how it was before.
yeah, so I think no, I think clearly there is the newer mills which have come up in the last 10, 15 years, and which have come in the last 5 years as well. So the technology has definitely improved.
Mm-hmm.
So they are more and more efficient
Mm-hmm.
in their working, in the way they produce. So if you take a sugar mill and if you compare the cost of producing a ton of sugar, and if you compare it with the mill now, there's definitely, it's much more efficient to produce that. So that definitely has happened. Be it a mill which is crushing the cane and producing the raw sugar or the white sugar, refined sugar, or be it a refinery which is taking in raw sugar and producing refined sugar. Definitely both are more technologically advanced.
Right.
So that is one. Uh, the other thing is supply chains have over a period of time reconfigured. So one, of course, I told about how the shift happened from white sugar to refined sugar. Uh, but 15 years back, 20 years back, white sugar or sugar was transported in 50 kg bags. Then people started to move that in much bigger bags, so
Mm-hmm.
1 ton, 1.2 metric ton bags.
Mm.
Because then you use less packing material, less labor intensive, and so on and so forth. Many countries have certain regulations that labor cannot lift beyond a certain beyond a
Wait.
certain weight. So these kind of regulations forced people to move on to big bags, and then that again now has moved slowly moving to big bulk flexi bulk liner bags.
Okay.
So, if you take a 20-foot container, you can
Mm.
load about 24 tons of sugar. So
Right.
there's a bag which just fits the full container, and
Okay.
sugar is just pumped into the container and then through centrifugal pumps, and then either it is offloaded through gravity or again through centrifugal pumps and directly put in silos. So that again is far more efficient. It is untouched, so you don't need multiple handlings. There's no sugar
And
loss.
not even, the kind of like, 1 ton bag lift and put,
Yeah, no forklifts, everything. So these are some
so it's
of the
almost like
supply.
liquid flow, right? It is almost like transporting orange juice or something in a tanker, or milk in a tanker, right? It is what
Correct,
you're
correct,
describing
correct.
is something like that, but just that it's a 20-foot cuboid container, and
Yeah,
but it's pumped in and extracted somewhat similar ways, but
yeah, yeah. So there
given
are
the difference
countries.
between solid and liquid, of course.
Yeah, there are countries who use bulk tankers,
Hmm.
which carry the solid granulated sugar.
Oh.
And obviously you have the container and the bulk flexi liners,
Hmm.
so that way. And then you spoke about liquid, so now the industry is also moving towards liquid sugar,
Hmm.
which is a even more efficient and a cleaner supply chain as far as sugar is
Industrial
concerned.
processors, food processors are concerned, right?
Yeah,
For processed foods, you may not need, you may prefer the liquid because it can, you can mix it up with your recipes. Is that correct? Like
yeah,
beet.
look, if you take 100 different uses of sugar and on products,
Hmm.
then most of them basically liquefy the sugar, and they add water, etc., and produce the final product,
Hmm.
right? So if you're using liquid sugar directly, then that saves you an additional stage. When you're manufacturing liquid sugar, the crystallization happens only after the sugar is in liquid form.
Correct.
Yeah, but crystallization takes a lot of energy. It uses
Exactly.
chemicals. So if you're
Exactly.
able to produce liquid sugar, tap out liquid sugar, and transport it and use it, then
Hmm.
it is a far more efficient and a cost effective way of producing sugar. So these are some of the changes which are also happening.
Right. Any industry consolidations?
Uh, so the consolidation is happening. Uh, so the bigger players are probably buying out mills which have a weak financial standing, or
Standing.
yeah, or are financially stressed, and we
Hmm.
see a lot of that happening in Brazil.
Hmm.
Yeah, uh, there is no new investment coming in the industry because, in terms of capacity, there's enough and more refining
Capacity.
capacity in the world. So today, the mills are operating at almost
Hmm.
40-50% of the ideal capacity. So there's clearly 6 to 7 million tons of ideal capacity, which
Hmm.
is underutilized. So at any
Hmm.
point of time, if the demand goes up, there is
Hmm.
enough and more capacity
Hmm.
to take care of that.
Hmm. Right.
And also it's not like a 10-15 million dollar kind of a capex,
Hmm.
which we use in some of the other commodities
Hmm.
at the primary processing level.
Hmm.
When you're putting a sugar mill,
Hmm.
the capex can be easily 200 million, $300 million, right? So the
Right. Hmm.
barriers for entry into this thing is also very large, and
Hmm.
hence nobody is willing to really put
Put in.
additional capex and investment in the industry.
Correct, correct. So I was looking at the, some of the sugar trade statistics, and we also spoke about them. When I looked at the statistics, one thing that sort of jumped out for me was that the sugar consumption, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of mostly held steady in the last 5 years in most country. Indonesia was one country where I saw that there was some growth. But if you read whether it is news media, social media, everywhere, people keep or one-on-one interactions among friends, we all keep talking about cutting down sugar intake. So how come sugar consumption has not fallen?
So sugar demand. Uh, so if you look at the agricultural domain, and if you look at the demand for agriculture, any agricultural commodity, typically they grow at a GDP growth rate of the country, which is
Mm-hmm.
anywhere between 1.5%, 2%. In some cases, it is more.
Mm.
So historically, now demand, because sugar is consumed in every country,
Right.
to collate that kind of a data is impossible, right?
Mm.
So a GDP growth rate is a good proxy which people have always used in
Mm-hmm.
arriving on a supply and demand equation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Supply is more easier because there are like 10, 15 major origins.
Mm-hmm.
So though they are more manageable in terms of crop surveys and estimating what will be the supply, but demand is a tedious process. So 2% demand is always plugged in that sugar will grow at a 2% demand.
Mm.
And if you look at, let's say, 8 to 9 years from back, that is the rate sugar was actually growing. So that was a
Right.
number which was plugged in to the S&D equation. But all the reasons which you just alluded, Venkat, people are moving away from sugar and preferring less calories and all. So the demand for sugar is still happening, but it is now growing at maybe 1% or slightly less than 1%.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not growing at 2% as it was earlier, but it is now growing at probably 1 or thereabout percent.
Okay. Okay. So I
And
get
and
that.
yeah, and the reason for that is you have still 75 to 80 million people added in world population every year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's one driving factor. You
Right.
have a large chunk. If you look at the last 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
you have almost a billion and a half people
Mm.
within Asia and Africa who have moved from a low income to a
To
medium income. So their
and
calorie consumption has gone up.
at
Uh,
a macro level. Yeah, I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so calorie consumption is also in form of not only proteins, but it's also in form of processed foods. And
Right.
processed foods obviously use a lot of sugar. Um, you know, so yeah, so sugar demand will always be there, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it is going to slow down in the coming years.
Right. On the consumer side, are there any changes that are taking place which will have an impact on the industry? Apart from this, which we talked about. In fact, I'm additionally curious when you said that industry is moving towards liquid sugar. The thought came to my mind that will we start buying liquid sugar, and instead of us, when we in the future when we talk about a spoonful of sugar, it may not be sugar crystals, but like will it be liquid sugar? Anyway, so I leave it to you. What are the consumer end changes that are taking place, which are significant for the industry in sugar?
So liquid sugar change is happening at an industrial level, at a large
Mm,
scale industrial level. I
mm.
don't see that happening at a consumer level
Consume.
to that extent, because liquid sugar has very less shelf life
Mm.
compared
Oh,
to
okay.
granulated sugar, right?
Okay.
So so those things will be driven by those factors.
Correct.
At
Correct.
a
Correct.
consumer level, you will not have. But at a macro consumer level, I think uh, so there will be people who will be moving away to less calories, right,
Mm-hmm.
and hence moving away from sugar. Uh, uh, there'll be people, as I said, who will be driving the demand for sugar, middle class, growing population, etc. But I think one of the trends which I see is that consumers are getting more and more uh, aware. They
Mm-hmm.
want to know where is the sugar coming from.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know uh, that whether this sugar or any commodity for that matter is grown in a sustainable fashion,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of impact it's having on the climate, on the environment, what
Right.
kind of impact it is having on the communities.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's involving child labor in cocoa or even involving child on sugarcane fields,
Mm-hmm.
to what kind of a water impact, water usage it'll have, to a whole host of other things, to what kind of carbon footprint.
Right.
So I think that awareness is coming. So more and more companies will move to sustainable way of growing sugar or any other agri commodity, and I think that is the biggest shift as far as consumer
Mm-hmm.
at a macro level, which we are seeing.
That's very interesting that that people are asking and questioning this environmental impact and origin and social responsibility. In the next part of our discussion, please let's spend a little time on these aspect and
Sure.
on water of water consumption by this industry and also the other social issues that you just talked about. Let's take it up in the next part of our discussion now. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you for joining us in yet another episode of Move Conversations. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the Move Conversations YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get notifications of new episodes. Thank you very much. Till I see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day.